You ever feel like we've all just blindly accepted one version of history and ignored all the others? Like, think about it, this story of the flood, the one where the world basically resets. You hear about it in multiple cultures. It's everywhere. But here's the wild part: Islam actually talks about it too, in a way that's so raw, so unfiltered, it makes you stop and think, maybe there's something deeper going on here, not myth, not fairy tale, something primal, something real. And when you hear how detailed and serious it gets, not about magic, but about consequence, warning, ego, and survival, it just hits different. You start to realize this isn't just a bedtime story. This is a mirror, and maybe we've been avoiding what it's actually trying to show us. It's not just a flood, it's a metaphor for ego collapse. Because let's be real, most people walk around thinking they're untouchable. They think just because life's going fine today, it's always going to stay that way, but life doesn't work like that. You build this illusion around yourself, layer by layer. The job, the status, the followers, the approval, the constant need to be right. And then you start believing that this illusion is you. But here's the thing nobody wants to admit: when your ego gets louder than your inner voice, you stop hearing the truth. And when you stop hearing the truth, you stop evolving, you stop learning, you stop being real. Think about it. How many times have you known someone who had all the signs, like life was sending them warnings? Their health was crashing, their relationships were falling apart, they were constantly angry, but they still kept pretending everything was okay. Why? Because admitting there's a problem means facing your own weakness. And for the ego, weakness is like poison. So it pushes the truth away, covers it with pride, and pretends the storm isn't coming. And that's what makes the fall so brutal. Not the storm itself, but the fact that you ignored every sign that it was on its way. This is exactly what that flood represents. Not just a literal drowning, but a drowning of lies. The water comes to wash away all the fake layers people wrap themselves in. The arrogance, the mockery, the rejection of truth, the obsession with control, it all goes under. And the only ones who survive are the ones humble enough to admit they don't know everything, that they need help, that they need to change. In real life, you see this in people who hit rock bottom, people who lose everything, the career, the relationship, the comfort, and instead of blaming the world, they finally sit down and ask the real question: what did I ignore? And in that moment, something wild happens. The ego cracks, and for the first time, they see clearly. Not with fear, but with awareness. And yeah, it hurts like hell, but it's also the beginning of something honest. The scary part is most of us are closer to the edge than we think. We wake up, scroll through our phones, compare ourselves, judge others, ignore our own voice, keep chasing a high we can't explain, and all the while something inside us is screaming, slow down, face it, stop pretending. But we don't listen, not because we don't hear it, but because our ego is terrified of what happens if we do. It's terrified of the death of the old self. But that's the paradox. The old self has to drown for the new one to rise. That's what this metaphor is about. It's not punishment. It's transformation. The flood comes when everything false in you needs to go, when your pride becomes a prison, when your stubbornness becomes a curse. And it's painful, yeah, but it's also necessary, because on the other side of that collapse is freedom. Not comfort, real freedom. The kind where you don't need to prove anything to anyone, where you stop playing roles, where you stop performing, where you finally learn to just be and listen and grow. And sometimes it takes a storm to get there. Sometimes the flood is the gift. Islam frames the flood as a warning, not a fantasy. And that changes everything when you really think about it. We've been trained to look at ancient stories like bedtime fables, just cute tales with moral lessons. But this one hits different. Islam doesn't treat the flood like a fantasy land moment with magical animals and floating rainbows. It's real. It's raw. It's a brutal look at what happens when human beings ignore the truth for too long. And that's the part people don't want to talk about. Because if it's just a fantasy, you can escape it. But if it's a warning, you've got to confront yourself. You've got to ask, what am I doing right now that's setting myself up for a collapse I'm pretending won't come in life? The flood looks different for everyone. For some people, it's the moment their business crashes because they built it on ego, not value. For others, it's the moment their relationship falls apart because they ignored every red flag, including their own. For some, it's the breakdown after years of pretending to be okay. pushing everything under the rug until the pressure explodes. And that's the thing. The flood doesn't come without warning. It never does. The skies darken. The signs are everywhere. Your body feels it. Your mind knows it. The people around you start pulling away. But still, most of us just keep going like we're invincible. We laugh at the idea that anything could break us. And that arrogance is exactly what Islam highlights. It's not about ignorance. It's about defiance. The storm isn't a surprise. It's a response, and that's where it gets deep. Because in the Islamic perspective, the flood isn't God being angry for no reason. It's not just divine rage. It's the final alarm after every other warning was ignored. The message was given. Again and again, the truth was laid out, calmly, clearly, humbly. But people chose pride over honesty. They mocked instead of reflected. And the flood wasn't sent to destroy them. It came to stop the cycle, to reset the direction, to protect whatever was left that still had purity in it. That's not a fairy tale. That's not myth. That's the same thing that happens in your life when you finally break down. It's not just chaos. It's the universe forcing you to get real. Think about people who go through that kind of collapse. They lose everything they once clung to, the fake image, the lies they told themselves, the need to control everyone and everything, and for the first time, they start over from truth. They begin to live in a way that's grounded, grateful, honest, and most of the time they'll tell you they saw the signs years before it happened. They just didn't want to admit it. That's the lesson the flood gives. It's not you messed up so you get punished. It's you ignored what could have saved you, and now you're forced to face what you ran from. And what's wild is Islam treats that moment as a pivot point, not the end, but the point where clarity enters, where masks fall, where truth finally becomes louder than denial. That's why the flood is framed as a warning, not to scare people, not to shame them, but to remind them that there's always a line, always a limit. And once you cross it, life has a way of washing away everything false until all that's left is what's real. There's an insane level of detail in how the event is described, and that's what makes it feel so real. Not like some distant myth or symbolic tale, but like something that could happen right now, in this exact world, under the weight of the exact same mistakes we keep making. Islam doesn't just say a flood came and everyone drowned. No, it walks you through it. The skies, the warnings, the people laughing, the one who's building something while everyone mocks him. The wood being cut, the storm being sensed, the rejection getting louder. It's cinematic, but not in a Hollywood way. It's detailed in a way that makes you sit up and go, wait, I've seen this before. Because the same energy is still out there today. In every office, in every relationship, in every social structure, someone is warning, someone is building, and someone else is laughing. The detail matters because it doesn't let you escape the story. You can't just brush it off as a parable. It forces you to feel it. Like, imagine a man working day after day on something he believes is right, something he knows is coming, and people he loves, not strangers, people he grew up with, shared meals with. They look him in the eye and say he's crazy. They mock him, not because they're evil, but because they become numb. Numb to warnings, numb to consequences, numb to anything that challenges their comfort. And isn't that exactly what happens in life? People don't fall because they didn't know better. They fall because they refuse to accept better. And that's the thread that runs through every great collapse in history. Someone saw it coming, tried to do something about it, and was ignored because it was inconvenient. You see this in daily life too. Think of the person who tries to change their life. Maybe they start working on their health, or try to get sober, or leave a toxic environment. And suddenly everyone around them has something to say. You've changed. You think you're better now. They laugh, they question, they resist, not because the person is wrong, but because the person makes them uncomfortable, because that person building their metaphorical arc is a mirror to what they're not willing to face. And it's easier to mock than to reflect. But just like in the story, the rain doesn't care about their comfort. When it comes for all, and the story goes even deeper, down to who gets on the boat and who refuses, down to how some people beg to join only when the storm hits, but it's too late. And that's heavy because it's not about cruelty. It's about the cost of delay. When you delay your truth, when you laugh at the signs, when you prioritize ego over action, eventually the door closes. And when that door closes, no amount of regret can open it again. That's why the detail in the story hits so hard. It shows you the build-up, the decisions, the tension, the heartbreak. You don't just read it, you feel it. And suddenly, it's not just about the past. It's about you, about what you're building right now, about what signs you're ignoring, about what storm you feel coming, but keep pretending isn't real. Every hammer to that arc in the story feels like a metaphor for your own daily grind. Every laugh from the crowd feels like the doubts and judgment you get when you try to grow. Every raindrop feels like the tension inside you when you know you're overdue for change. That level of detail isn't random. It's there to wake you up, to pull you into the moment, to remind you that nothing collapses without warning, and nothing is saved without preparation. It's not just a story, it's a blueprint, not for building boats, but for building character, for building courage, for building the kind of clarity that holds you up when the storms finally come. Islam doesn't say people were dumb. It says they were too proud. And that right there is one of the most powerful psychological truths you'll ever come across. Because the downfall of most people, most relationships, most empires, most legacies isn't ignorance, it's ego. It's this silent, invisible force that makes people stop listening. They stop listening to others. They stop listening to reason. And worst of all, they stop listening to themselves. Pride builds walls around the heart. It makes a person allergic to humility. And when humility dies, growth dies with it. Islam's message doesn't look down on people like they were too stupid to understand. It says, no, they knew, they heard, they saw, but their pride made them reject it anyway. Look around in daily life, and you'll see this pattern everywhere. A person gets feedback at work. They're told kindly, hey, there's a better way to do this. But instead of learning, they get defensive. They take it as an attack, not a chance to grow. That's not stupidity, that's pride. Or think of someone in a relationship who's always blaming the other person. Deep down, they know they're part of the problem. They know their tone, their control, their coldness, their absence. It all adds up. But pride won't let them admit it, so they defend, argue, justify, and the connection slowly dies, not because they didn't understand love, but because they refuse to be vulnerable. Again, not dumb, just proud, and that's the chilling part about how Islam frames this. The people being warned weren't clueless, they were just too attached to their way of living. They didn't want to be seen as wrong. They didn't want to accept that someone else could see a bigger picture than they could. They thought listening meant losing. They thought changing meant weakness. And that's the trap so many fall into today. We've built a culture where being right is more important than being real. We confuse certainty with strength and silence with victory. And all the while, the truth is right in front of us, gently asking to be heard. Pride is such a dangerous thing because it wears the mask of confidence. It makes you feel powerful while it's secretly cutting off your ability to evolve. It keeps you stuck in patterns that no longer serve you, but you defend them anyway. And that defense turns into resistance. Resistance to advice, resistance to help, resistance to growth, and eventually resistance to reality. And reality doesn't wait for your approval, it just unfolds. It's the same reason some people never change until they hit rock bottom. Because pride made them wait until the pain of staying the same was worse than the pain of changing. When you study the deeper meaning of this story, you see that the people weren't evil cartoon villains. They were just like us, caught in the illusion of control, intoxicated by their own success, convinced that warnings were beneath them. And that's the danger, not evil, but arrogance, not malice, but self-importance. The belief that because things are good now, they'll stay that way forever. But storms don't care about your pride. When the skies turn, the only thing that saves you is the willingness to listen, to act, and to surrender the ego. And that's what Islam reminds us through this. That downfall is rarely about lack of knowledge. It's about the refusal to soften, to open, to change. It's about hearts hardened by pride, not minds lacking wisdom. It's not just about one guy. It's about society's tipping point. And when you really sit with that idea, it becomes clear that the story isn't pointing fingers at an individual. It's holding up a mirror to an entire collective. It's saying that collapse doesn't begin when one person fails. It begins when a culture stops caring. When a whole society starts numbing itself to truth, laughing at reflection, and normalizing destruction. That's when the real danger starts. And this is what Islam makes so clear. The flood wasn't just triggered by disbelief. It was triggered by a pattern that had gone unchecked for generations. a pattern of arrogance, injustice, mockery, and denial multiplied over time, until the weight of it could no longer hold. Think about it in the real world. No one wakes up and says, I want to destroy everything. Societies don't collapse in a single day. It starts slow. It starts small. People stop speaking up when they see something wrong. Others stop listening when someone cries for help. The honest voices get quieter, and the loudest ones are often the most lost. And soon, it becomes normal to ignore pain. It becomes normal to profit from lies. And everyone plays their role, not out of evil, but out of comfort, out of fear, out of habit. And the tipping point sneaks up quietly. A moment comes when the collective energy has gone so far off course, so far from its conscience, that nature or destiny or justice, whatever you call it, sends a correction, not as revenge, not as rage, but as a reset, a shaking of the ground to wake everyone up from the trance. Islam doesn't isolate the story to one man versus a bunch of villains. It shows you a society that laughed at the one trying to bring them back. And that's what stings, because we've all seen this in real life. The kid who speaks out against bullying and gets mocked. The worker who raises concerns and gets fired. The whistleblower who exposes truth and gets destroyed by the very system they tried to help. The person building something good while everyone else scrolls past and says, who does he think he is? These aren't villains laughing. They're people so used to noise that silence feels threatening, so used to distractions that truth feels like an insult. And that's how societies hit tipping points, not because they're unaware, but because they're unwilling. Look around and you'll see the patterns. Everyone rushing, everyone comparing, everyone reacting, nobody breathing, nobody pausing, nobody asking, where are we headed? And when someone does ask, they're told to relax, to be quiet, to not rock the boat. And that's exactly the problem. The boat's already sinking, but pride keeps the music playing. And that's what the story warns us about. Not one man's effort to build an ark, but a society's refusal to ask itself the hard questions until the rain already starts falling. What's even more powerful is that the tipping point wasn't just about actions. It was about hearts. When hearts become numb, when eyes refuse to see, when truth becomes the enemy of comfort, that's when the line is crossed. And Islam is saying, pay attention to your community, to your culture, to your soul. Because the flood doesn't just come when one person fails. It comes when we all ignore the signs for too long, thinking someone else will fix it, thinking someone else will speak up, thinking someone else will build the ark. But what if you're the one being called to build and you're too distracted to even notice? Islam actually talks about the refusal to obey being personal, not political. And that's where everything shifts, because we live in a world where it's always easier to point fingers outward than to look inward. People hear the word obedience and immediately think of control, government, rules, systems. But Islam flips the lens. It's not about obeying for the sake of authority. It's about obeying the voice inside you that already knows what's right. And when you refuse that voice, when you silence it over and over again just to stay comfortable or accepted or unbothered, you're not disobeying a law, you're disobeying your own soul. This refusal is so deeply personal, it's almost invisible from the outside. Nobody sees it when you pretend not to care. Nobody sees the internal conflict when you keep scrolling while your conscience is whispering, this isn't who you are. Nobody sees the moment you walk away from an opportunity to be honest because you're scared of being judged. The world won't call that rebellion, but you know it is. Deep inside, you know, when you've betrayed your higher self, and Islam makes that crystal clear. It's not about whether society sees you as obedient or rebellious. It's about whether your heart still responds when it's called toward truth. Think about the daily examples. You're in a conversation and someone's being disrespected. Your heart nudges you to speak up, but you stay quiet, not because you agree, but because it's easier. Or maybe you're in a job where you know things are unethical, and every day you feel the tension, but you push it down because the paycheck makes life easier. You tell yourself it's no big deal, but every time you ignore that inner voice, something in you dims. That's the real disobedience. Not breaking external rules, but breaking your own values, piece by piece, until eventually you can't even hear that voice anymore. This is what Islam talks about. That inner silence, that spiritual deadening that happens when you choose comfort over conscience for too long. And the scary part is how subtle it is. You don't notice the damage right away. At first, it feels like a win. You avoided conflict. You stayed safe. You didn't rock the boat. but slowly you start losing your own reflection. And when the storm finally comes, it's not just about what you did or didn't do. It's about how many chances you had to respond to truth and chose not to. Not because you were evil, but because you were tired, afraid, distracted, disconnected. And that's why the story isn't political. It's not about systems or movements. It's about individual choices stacking up over time. Choices that seem small in the moment, but build a pattern that either saves you or drowns you. And Islam honors the weight of those small decisions. It's not waiting for you to be perfect. It's calling you to be honest, to say yes when your conscience speaks, to choose humility when your ego wants to fight, to listen when it would be easier to ignore. Because every act of obedience isn't about submission to power. It's about alignment with purpose. It's about living in a way where your actions match your beliefs, where your choices reflect your truth, and where your soul gets lighter instead of heavier with every decision you make. And the most powerful thing is, you don't need anyone's permission to obey that voice. You don't need approval, applause, or validation. It's the kind of obedience that happens in silence, in solitude, in the moments when no one's watching. It's not loud, but it's life-changing. It's the kind that builds peace inside you, even if it costs you comfort outside of you. And that's the kind of obedience Islam elevates, not political obedience to a system, but personal obedience to the truth that's already written inside you. The message isn't punishment, it's reflection, and that right there shifts everything. Because most people are conditioned to think that when something bad happens, it's because they were being punished. Like life is this giant scoreboard keeping track of every mistake and just waiting to strike back. But Islam turns that idea upside down. It doesn't say the flood came just to destroy or to crush people under guilt. It says the flood came to reflect what had already been happening in their hearts. It came as a mirror, not a hammer. And that's where the real lesson is hidden. It's not about fearing divine anger. It's about finally seeing what your choices have been building day by day, thought by thought, action by action in life. You see this unfold constantly. People wake up one day in the middle of a storm, a failed relationship, a broken business, a deep personal crisis, and they say, "Why me?" But what they don't realize is that the storm didn't just arrive out of nowhere. It's the reflection of every ignored warning, every quiet nudge they silenced, every uncomfortable truth they ran from. It wasn't a curse. It was a consequence, a loud echo of all the small decisions they didn't take seriously. And that's why the flood in the story is so powerful. Not because it came to ruin them, but because it came to wake them up. You've probably felt it yourself. That moment where everything falls apart, but somehow deep down, it feels like something inside you is being rebuilt. Like the pain isn't trying to hurt you, it's trying to get your attention. It's trying to show you who you've become. And that's not punishment. That's mercy disguised as chaos. Islam frames it this way on purpose, because if you think you're being punished, you become a victim. But if you realize it's a reflection, you take responsibility. And once you take responsibility, you take back your power. Think about someone who's been living a lie for years. Maybe they've been pretending to be someone they're not, chasing validation, stuck in toxic patterns, drowning in distractions. They feel empty, but they keep pushing through. Then one day it all collapses. The job disappears. The people leave. The silence becomes loud. And in that moment, they're forced to face the truth they've been running from. Was that punishment, or was it the moment they finally got to see who they really are without the noise? It was the mirror. It was life holding up the reflection and saying, "This is what you've built. Now what are you going to do with it?" This kind of reflection is uncomfortable. It strips away illusions. It makes you feel vulnerable, raw, exposed. But it also brings clarity, the kind of clarity that no comfort can give you. And that's the beauty of it. When Islam talks about the flood, it's not just about what was destroyed. It's about what was revealed. It's about how the storm didn't create the crisis. It simply exposed it. And in exposing it, gave people the chance to either face themselves or continue denying what was already broken inside. When you look at your own life, you'll notice that every real transformation didn't come from comfort. It came from discomfort that made you ask real questions. Who am I becoming? What am I running from? What am I ignoring that's now showing up as pain? And those questions aren't there to shame you. They're there to heal you, to pull you out of pilot and into self-awareness. And when you start seeing the hardest moments in your life not as punishment, but as reflections of what needs to change, you stop fighting reality and start growing through it. That's what makes the story so relevant. It's not ancient history. It's your personal evolution written in metaphor, not to scare you into obedience, but to inspire you into transformation through reflection. And now when you really look at it, not as a story, not as a religious tale, but as a mirror to the human experience, you start to realize that the flood wasn't just water and wood and waves. It was a reset, a deep reset of the soul. It was the end of noise and the beginning of clarity. It was the collapse of pride and the rise of purpose. It was the silence after the storm where everything false was washed away and everything real was finally able to breathe. And that's not just their story, that's ours. We're all walking through storms, pretending we don't see the clouds, laughing through the thunder, thinking we can outrun the rain. But the truth is, the storm isn't there to break us, it's there to break what isn't us. What isn't true, what isn't real, and when you understand that, you stop fearing the collapse, you welcome it. Because what's built on truth cannot be drowned. Every single day you wake up, you're standing at the edge of two choices. Continue lying to yourself or have the courage to be honest. Ignore the signs or learn from them. Repeat the cycle or break it. And the thing is, no one will make that decision for you. Your friends won't. Your family won't. Life is waiting for you to look in the mirror and say, I'm done hiding. I'm done running. I'm done pretending that comfort is better than freedom, because the real prison isn't pain, it's denial. The real suffering isn't loss, it's the slow death of knowing you didn't live in alignment with who you are. And that's why reflection is everything. You either reflect now, or you get forced to reflect later. But one way or another, you will face the storm, so let it come. Let the flood rise if it has to. Let the rain pour if it needs to. Because when it's all over, and you're still standing, soaked but awake, alone but real, stripped but free, that's when you'll know who you are. That's when you'll understand what it means to be unshakable. The most powerful version of you isn't the one who avoids pain, it's the one who grows through it. The one who says, I'd rather face a storm that frees me than live in a fake shelter that traps me. The one who knows that peace doesn't come from avoiding discomfort, it comes from surviving it. And if the people laugh while you build your ark, let them. If they mock you for changing, let them. If they leave while you heal, let them. You are not here to please the crowd. You are here to follow that quiet voice that keeps pulling you towards something more. That voice is the truth. And the truth, even when it's ignored, never stops being true. Build anyway, speak anyway, walk anyway, because the same storm they're laughing at now is the one they'll wish they prepared for later. Don't let their fear become your delay. Don't let their noise drown out your direction. Remember this. Ships don't sink because of the water around them. They sink because of the water they let in. Protect your peace. Protect your purpose. And when the rain starts, don't panic. Just remember you were made for this. The same fire that tried to burn you will light your way. The same flood that tried to drown you will lift you higher. Pain is not the enemy. Fear is not the enemy. The real enemy is forgetting who you are when things get hard. So hold the line. Stay grounded. And keep walking, because in the end, storms don't destroy warriors, they reveal them.